those of you I've spoken to tonight, I know you probably know a whole lot. You probably know exactly what I'm going to talk about and what Daniel will cover, but we welcome the chance to see you personally, meet you, have a chat, but equally try and answer questions as best we can. I will say, of course, I can't tell you anything that's price sensitive. We can't disclose anything that's new that we haven't already disclosed, but we'll try to the best degree possible to let you know what the strategies are, how we're prosecuting those strategies, and ask us whatever you like and we'll try to answer it, all right? I'll give you an overview. Daniel will do as you would expect and give you a deep dive on detail, science, and if he goes too long, I'll pull him back, or Jane will, but we do want to get to the Q&A as quickly as possible. So, we're more than just an oncology company because we've got a cardiac application to how we approach oncology. We talk about RNA and RNA-directed therapeutics. So you'll hear that today, and you'll hear that in respect of Strategy 3, and you might have read the Monash announcement around our fragment screening approach to identifying new molecules. That's in that space. So if we've got time, we'll touch on that today. Jane. So Jane's turning slides for me, we hope. Okay, I'm sure it's coming, so I know where we're going, but we're going to talk about, actually the next slide is a disclaimer, right, and it's got about 500 words on it, but you've probably read those words before, so I won't talk to them. But what I will talk to, thank you. And okay, should we read this? No. All right, but we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Ben. So this is really history. I don't want to read every box. I'll highlight some of the grey boxes, but there's been some key inflection points in our history. You would remember, I hope many of you, June 2020 when we released results from our phase 2 trial in Israel. We got a 40% response, basically in very heavily hard to treat patients. So that's important. You'll hear that again today in other discussions around acute myeloid leukemia. But that was a great result because it said our drug, albeit old, is relevant today in a current setting in AML. So that was important. That moved us forward. And then we had the tailwind from the City of Hope. So I will move quickly through some of this commentary, but some of you are going, what do you mean, the City of Hope? Well, make sure we come back to that, and I think we will when we talk FTO. But the City of Hope, their exercise and their program around the FTO protein was really a massive win for us, because when they said, well, what drug could actually work on FTO, and when they went to the National Cancer Institute library of 260,000 compounds, which had ours in it, fortunately, and they screened it, the most potent inhibitor of that protein was us. So that news came out. Actually, a shareholder found that, right? Yeah. Originally. So I think we know who it is, but are they here? No. Okay. So, they are. But of course, our scientist friend over here got very excited, and since then we've been going after that opportunity. So that's a big part of strategy. So I've touched on AML, I've touched on FTO, and then the middle part of this chart reminds you that we've had a number of cellular discoveries around the ability of our drug to prevent cardio damage. And we've now repeated those results and got them favorably in animal models. We're doing additional animal work that you will hear about later in the year. So we've now got a lot of confidence and a lot of clarity about how we'll go after the cardioprotective opportunity. And that is a big opportunity. Daniel and I will trade opinions about which opportunity is biggest. He knows I'll say cardio and he'll say FTO. But cardio is near in, it's closer, and we'll get it done quickly, we think. So we'll come back to that. Our extramedullary trial in Australia, in, again, acute myeloid leukemia, in the extramedullary form of that. We announced that in June 22 as commencing. The IV formula. The IV formula is really important. We'll touch on it in more detail later. I think we put that announcement out 2 weeks ago. It gives us more intellectual property. It gives us utility in how the drug is used. It means you can use the drug, outpatient, outside of hospital. But really the IP opportunity that presents is really important and valuable. And I talked about the Monash program down here, which is underway, but we'll touch on that in more detail later. You know who our largest shareholder is, right? just over here, and I think you may know he was buying on market a few weeks ago, right? So Daniel is certainly our largest shareholder. John Cullity, our chair, US-based. Number two, Merchant is a Perth-based institutional fund manager. They've been with us for a number of years. They've been a long-time supporter. They've done well. They remain a supporter. In fact, Andrew Chapman was in Melbourne last week. Some of you would have heard he was talking about opportunities, and he mentioned that we're his number one. So that was helpful, and we appreciate his support. Those movements on the graph, I mean, some of it's market-driven, some of it's event-driven. Certainly the inflection points I talked about before explain some of what's happened in the past. I mean, this is important to all of you. It's important to us, but frankly, what's important is we execute strategy, we deliver results, and we market those results long term. That's what will create longer value, and that's what we're working on. So why invest in Race Oncology now? And we presented this to the Microcap conference just up the road earlier in the week. So we are the first company to target the FTO opportunity, and Daniel will talk more about, the M6 RNA, the pathway, but for us specifically FTO. So FTO exists in all cancer types that we've had a look at about a 15% level. It does mean that potentially there is a huge possible market. Possible, right? We've got to work out how to get there, and we'll give you more detail on how we're pursuing that. I talked about cardiac damage, the fact that our drug historically was always understood to be less cardiotoxic, i.e. it did less damage to the heart when used as a chemotherapeutic. What we've now understood is that when you use it in combination with another chemotherapeutic, doxorubicin, that you get heart protection, and you still get an anti-cancer effect. In fact, you likely get a better anti-cancer effect. So you're getting a double benefit, which is very important and relevant to patients. You know our history, the fact that our drug's been around for many years. It's been in over 1,500 patients and 40 trials. So as a result, we understand it well. It means that there are less risks involved in us taking our drug further down the road. And I talked about IP, particularly improved formulation. We've got a patent portfolio in the US, but it's important that we build on that and create more value, and we're doing exactly that, as we should. We like to talk about our business through the drug, the people driving this business and the strategy. Starting with the drug, I've touched on some aspects of the drug and what it does and how it operates. So I talked about patients, trials. I think we haven't said, for some time, but our US drug, orphan drug designation, which is a 7-year exclusivity if you land it, but it's available. We've made the drug to good manufacturing practice and US patents. So there's a good history. Traditionally, I'll go back to what pre-219, the business was designed or was targeting to effectively market our drug as a chemotherapeutic for acute myeloid leukemia. That was the ambition, that was the plan. But so many things have happened since, so we now have these two big tailwinds. So FTO I touched on. If you haven't had a look at the Professor Chen paper in Cancer Cell, it talks about if you inhibit through the RNA pathway, FTO, that creates anti-tumor effects. So inhibiting FTO is valuable to cancer. And all this work, to be fair, is preclinical, but we know it's being replicated in other institutions, and that those institutions have equally replicated that it's bisantrene that remains the most potent inhibitor. So what we've got to do is the work that will take that forward into patients. Cardiac protection I talked about, but here's a headline: the role of anthracyclines. Today's cancer patients are tomorrow's cardiac patients. So if you get chemotherapy successfully, the risk is that you may have a cardiac weakness upstream later in your life that may in fact mean that you get through the cancer, but you don't get through a cardiac program down the road. So that's important. If you want to Google chemotherapeutics and cardiac damage, there's thousands of words and thousands of articles. It's a real problem. We were on a call this morning with some people in the US, and they validated exactly that. So we heard, everyone believes this is an important need, and we've got a drug that, if it delivers on that need, will make a big difference in this space. John Cullity on the left. John's got a pharmaceutical background. He understands a lot about health economics. This is a business ultimately where health economics is really important, particularly in the US. And John's worked, that company there called Tillett, they're a deal-making company. So at a point in time, and I know later you'll ask that question when, we'll be trying to work through that. So John's well qualified to help us with that. I don't have to talk about Daniel, I don't think. I think everybody knows Daniel, his background, right?
They probably don't.
But Daniel, aside of being the Chief Scientific Officer, Exec Director and owning 8 or 9% of the company, is obviously a big part of what's happened over the last couple of years. And you'll hear from Daniel passionately, particularly about FTO.
Yes,
And cardio protection. Mary Harney's actually Melbourne-based. Mary joined us as a non-exec director. So she's a non-exec, so she's here for you as shareholders to make sure that we're doing everything we can, to help us all. The team is, frankly, well qualified, works hard, delivers a lot, reasonably paid, not overpaid. But they're all here for the same reasons as you. We're all trying to create shareholder value. That's how we will sort of win, and how no doubt you will win ultimately as well. But we outsource a lot. We do a lot of our work externally, as we should, because it means we don't have fixed costs. We've got variable cost. We invest with the best and brightest wherever they are in the world when it makes sense. So you probably know this off by heart, the 3-pillar strategy. We did iterate it last year at the AGM. We did so because the cardioprotective opportunity came through. We now talk about the business through 3 programs, and those programs are using our current formula, using an improved formula, and in pillar 3, new formulas. I'd also remind you that, of course, you'll say, what are we all doing this for? Well, yeah, we're doing it for patients, because if you create patient improvement, if you make gains in healthcare, you've then got something that you can take to the world. We can't do that. We can't take it to the world, but we can introduce it to the world through large pharma companies. You know the names of them. They're the people that have the regulatory people, the sales people, the ability to take these businesses and move them out around the world, and that's how value is created. So that's the ambition, and it doesn't mean, the other question people say, does it mean an acquisition? Maybe. Does it mean a partnership? Maybe. It can mean many things, and it can take many forms. Briefly on strategy, because we'll give you detail, but current Xantreme, we've got the extramedullary AML trial opening in Australia, open now, recruiting for patients. We're taking that trial to Europe because you funded it, you know that. We're working through Spain and Italy, and we're making good progress. It's very complicated. Some of the team, the admin, the forms, everything. It's complicated, but we're getting there step by step. Daniel will talk about FTO. We will prove in principle through that trial, we'll get some reads on FTO. So that's important through Stratum 2. The US IND, you'll probably want to hear more about that. We will this year, within the calendar year, give you an update on exactly what it looks like, but we're working hard behind the scenes, doing what needs to be done to get that underway. That's an investigational new drug application. It means getting agreement with the FDA that we can trial our drug in the US in the future. It doesn't mean we're opening a US trial, but it gives us the option to do that in the future. Cardioprotection I've talked about. We can use our current drug to evaluate cardioprotection. So pillar 2 again is our new improved formula. We talked about the IV formula that can be used peripherally, i.e. through a vein in the arm. That just makes it a whole lot easier to target solid tumours, right? Which most cancers are. And it gives us new IP and a larger market. I talked about pillar 3. That's development partnerships, but new molecules, and the Monash agreement will give us the ability to look at that. So using those same 3 pillars, you probably heard, but briefly reminding you that we've got a number of AML trials in place. So we've got the combination drug trial where our drug is being used in combination in Israel through Professor Nagler, who ran our 2020 trial. So it's called an investigator-led trial. He's running the trial. He's using our drug. He's using it with 2 other drugs, and generally in oncology you use multiple drugs to attack cancer, you get a better result. That's what they're doing there. That trial has moved out of phase 1 into phase 2, so it's in the efficacy stage. It'll report when it hits certain patient numbers, and we're in their hands as regards when that happens. The AML, acute myeloid leukemia, EMD, extramedullary form of, has two stratums. So stratum 1 is high dose, which is conventional chemotherapy, and stratum 2 is low dose, where you'll hear more about FTO and how we get a read on that. And cardioprotection, we will target breast cancer and how we do that. It will likely be Xantrine and doxorubicin. We're running the planning on that. We hope to share details of that within calendar year and to get that trial away next year. Again, that's funded through the money we raised with your support. Xantrine optimized, there's a number of different things there. Some of them we'll touch on in more detail, but what we're trying to determine is what's the best indication or cancer type to go after, which will demonstrate that inhibiting or improving the regulation of FTO is critical, and we'll do it in a cancer type. But we'd love to do it in 15 cancers, but we don't have the money. But other people may do upstream. But we'll do it in a way that's affordable, manageable, delivers and communicates a result. And the new molecule program I touched on. So I think with that, I'm going to pass over to Daniel. Daniel will give you more detail, and I'm sure you want to hear more detail. And equally, if I've moved through stuff that you wanted to ask about, just remember what thoughts that triggers, and we'll come back to it in Q&A. Daniel.
Thanks, Phil. So Phil's covered a lot of the AML program, but it's really important to particularly look at some of the depth of this investigator-initiated trial that's going on in Israel at the moment. It's a combination trial using two nucleoside analogues, fludarabine and clofarabine, at high dose of Xantrine. And what makes this interesting is that it is treating patients that, if they were in Australia, would not be treated. These patients that are in this trial are patients here in Australia would be offered palliative care and told to say goodbye to your loved ones because you're not going to be around for much longer. So Professor Nagler is someone who is, if a patient comes to him and says, I want to be treated, he will find a way to treat them. And so he'll take on these patients. These are the sorts of patients that are incredibly difficult to treat. They've obviously failed multiple lines of previous treatment and not succeeded. And it's a sieving process if you think about it. So treatment, a patient when they first get cancer, get the first treatment, they've got a good chance of responding. If they fail that and they then get another treatment and another treatment and another treatment, the end result of that is the patients that fail 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of treatment, the chance that they'll respond to a new treatment is very low, even if the treatment's fantastic. And to have got in the phase 1B stage, which is just working out whether the safe dose is, so not even looking for efficacy, we managed to get 3 of the 6 patients bridged to a transplant. So it's an amazing outcome. This is the best sort of, if you're a patient and you've got AML and you can handle high intensity chemo, and not all patients can, that's the outcome you want. That gives you the chance of being cured, surviving, and going on to a long life, if you're young enough, obviously. And this is, if some of you will remember back to the 2 French girls that had AML when they were kids, that actually in those days was very difficult to do stem cell transplants. You had to have a perfect match. Basically, you had to have a sibling, and it's very unlikely. So they were able to do very few transplants. The risk of the transplant was very high. They didn't really know much about it. But those 2 patients got bisantrene, got a transplant, and they've gone on to have a long life. They're still alive, got families. This is something that makes sort of what can be sometimes a science exercise real. This is real people's lives being changed by this drug. And I think that from my perspective, this is the sort of thing that makes it worthwhile continuing. Good thing about this trial is it's open label, so you're not sitting around waiting for a double-blinded study to come. So you might be 3 years for some companies. Some of you who are invested in other companies, they'll be waiting for results to come in. It can be it's very difficult to wait, and it will be reported in stages. So it's not our trial; we don't control it. They provide us with the data, allow us to release it at certain points in the trial. And as soon as we have that, we'll update the market. Hopefully, could be any time between now and early next year will be the next update. It just depends on patient recruitment. Next slide. As Phil rightly points out, this is the thing about bisantrene that most excites me. And it's kind of a shame because I didn't discover it. I wish I had. Then I'd be really excited about it. No, I didn't discover it. This all came from Professor Chen's lab. He discovered it. I just got to get excited about it when I was sent the paper. And the reason why I'm so excited about it, it's a major opportunity in cancer that doesn't come along very often. We've learnt a lot about cancer. Many of you might think, oh, we're still not very good at treating it. But we've actually learnt what causes most cancers now. We know the systems, we know the major ones. There's a few minor ones that pop up every so often. But all the major ones have been known for a long time. This is a major system that's been discovered only in the last few years. Very unlikely. It comes along maybe once a decade, you'll get something of this scale. And the M6A system, that's what makes it such an exciting opportunity. So as Phil mentioned, it's about 15% of all cancers. That is huge. To put it in sort of context, the checkpoint inhibitors, which are the drug class of the decade, $50 billion worth of sales, they're in about 10% of cancers. So it gives you, just put that in some sort of context. So most cancer drugs target a very small number, or they've been around for 50 years and they're off-label and they're very cheap, like the anthracyclines. So what makes it such an exciting thing is it's a regulatory system, and when that regulatory system goes wrong, the cells stop doing what they're supposed to be doing. So if let's say they're a liver cell and they're supposed to be doing what liver cells do, and they're fine, everything's intact. If this regulatory system goes wrong, suddenly they can then go on and become a cancer. And particularly with this pathway, when this one goes wrong, you get a development of very aggressive cancer. It grows very rapidly, becomes very difficult to treat, becomes resistant to a lot of different treatments, and it also often metastasizes around the body. That's the point where this system starts to go wrong. So it's a really key point in the development of cancer. So cancer is a long disease. It takes 30 years typically to get cancer from the initiation to when you actually notice it. So this is what makes it such an exciting opportunity. A lot of groups are out there looking for inhibitors of proteins, key proteins in this pathway, and one of the ones is FTO. FTO is really interesting because it's one of two demethylases. The other one's ALK-BH5, and that one is lethal if you can't live without it. So it's much harder to inhibit a lethal protein because it'll kill the patient if you try and stop it. FTO, on the other hand, you can actually, there are some people that are born that don't actually have functional FTO at all. So it's much more of a targeted opportunity. Next slide. So how are we going about trying to prove this? So we happen to be the lucky company, the first company anywhere in the world to be able to go after this opportunity. So it's been discovered in the lab by scientists and it has to get translated to the clinic. And some company has to be the first company that does that anywhere in the world. Every single drug that's ever been developed in a new class, new opportunity, has to have the first company that does it. And in this particular case, just through chance and luck, happens to be us. And so we happen to have the first clinical trial open targeting FTO anywhere in the world, including any of the other M6A proteins. So the other one's on metal 3, which is some of the other companies are going after us on the methylase side of things. So we're really excited about this. We're doing this in extramedullary AML, and the reason why we're doing this in extramedullary AML is AML is a very crowded clinical space. There's 900 clinical trials running in AML. There's only 50,000 AML patients every year get AML, so it's and only about 5% of patients will actually participate in a clinical trial. So you can do those numbers and you go, how does anyone get anything done? So you need to find a clear space that you can actually do a trial. And extramedullary AML offers that. There are no other clinical trials in extramedullary AML being done, even though about 20 to 25% of patients actually have this form of AML. And the reason why it's kind of been ignored is you can't tell whether a patient's got extramedullary AML unless it's on the skin or you put the patient into a PET machine. So a PET machine's a scanner, picks up radioactive glucose, sugar, And you can see here a patient, this was from Professor Nagler's trial. This patient's a woman. They had been treated with conventional treatment. It had cleared the AML from their bone marrow and their blood. So they were actually, by normal standards, considered cured and ready for a transplant, except they happened to have a whole lot of AML in a form of a solid tumour in their breast tissue. And that had been resistant to treatment. So it hadn't responded to conventional treatment. It had survived in the tissue. And as you can imagine, if you gave a bone marrow transplant to this patient, all that would happen is the cancer would come out of that tumour, spread back around the body, and the patient would be very severely ill. This is after the same patient after one treatment round of bisantrene or xantrine on its own, and it's able to get rid of that extramedullary. And this opened up an opportunity for us in two ways. One, it's a targetable AML market that we can go after, that's a niche. And the other one is it allows us to target FTO. So we, in combination with an oral decitabine, so for those of you who know, we're in collaboration with Aztecs, which is a division of Osaka, a Japanese company. They've developed a form of decitabine that can be given orally. Normally it has to be given by intravenously. And this allows, the advantage of doing this is that it makes the cells that overproduce FTO more sensitive to xantrine. And so we're going to be running a trial looking at this. So you've seen some of the results we've presented in mice. This combination works really well even in extramedullary AML as well. So it's really an exciting opportunity, and I think this will be, a lot of people will be focusing on the results of this when it comes through. So I've been looking forward to expanding this into Europe where there's more patients. Next slide. I won't go too much into melanoma. Many of you remember our melanoma preclinical results. Basically, FTO is very important in half of all melanomas, particularly on the immune therapy, and it can work in 3 different ways to treat the melanoma, and that's it's a great opportunity when you have a drug. You want to have multiple ways you can attack the cancer, and you're more likely to get a positive result for the patient. The other cancer we've been looking at in great detail is what's called clear cell renal cell carcinoma. It's kidney cancer, a really nasty kidney cancer. Often is not diagnosed until you're stage 4, and there's really nothing much they can do for you at that point. That's why it's got such a low survival. There's not a lot of treatment options for it as well. But the standard treatments that are used are what are called kinase inhibitors. So a range of different kinase inhibitors. They target a growth factor in the cancer. And what we found is that xantrine, in combination with one of these kinase inhibitors, is able to kill these cancer cells much more effectively. Shows really strong synergy. This opens up a really great opportunity to get in there and prove out in a solid tumour indication. So we're going through at the moment trying to determine which of the solid tumour opportunities, remember we could pretty much go into any cancer, is the best opportunity to show proof of concept. And so the whole bunch of factors that go into that, it's not easy. You need to have really good preclinical data to support this. You need to have support from clinicians. You need to be able to recruit patients, and you need to be able to pay for it. Luckily, you guys have already helped us on that last bit, and we're funded to run one of these trials in this area. Next slide. Cardioprotection. So this one I had a little bit more to do with. So FTO was nothing other than reading a paper. Cardioprotection was something that I thought of before I joined RACE. So when I was doing due diligence on the company before I rang them up, I looked at the data from the lower cardiotoxicity and wondered whether it was, why was it that this drug, of all the drugs in the class, so all the other chemotherapeutic drugs cause damage to the heart, and this one doesn't. Why is it? Is it that the drug just doesn't happen to have the properties that cause cardio damage? Or is it actually just as cardiotoxic as all the other drugs, but it's hitting a secondary pathway that rescues that damage? And the difference between that is one is an alternative, and you have to use it as an alternative. The other one will mean it will rescue the damage that other cardiotoxic drugs use. And from a commercial perspective, it's much easier to convince a clinician to add on a treatment to what they're already used to using than it is to try and get them to switch from one drug to another. So they get to keep all the benefits of the drug they know really well and avoid some of the downsides. And so this is why this is such an exciting opportunity. It's why Phil gets so excited about this opportunity, is because it's a pre-existing market. Everyone knows it's a massive problem. It's very, very widely used class of drugs, particularly the anthracyclines, and it offers a lot of opportunity to very quickly collect data that will convince a large pharma company that this is something they can really push. This is what they're the sort of opportunities they're looking for. Right, next slide. This just shows a bit of the animal data. This is of mice. You're probably wondering, oh, gee, it didn't actually push it down that much. If it gets down much more than the grey, which is the doxorubicin on the mice die. You can't actually damage the heart that much before the heart doesn't work. So while those levels look like not severe, they're actually, if you rescaled it, that's kind of zero, because the mice can't survive. Really good, couldn't ask for anything better. And the most interesting thing from my perspective, the most unexpected, was a lack of additional toxicity. You're adding two toxic drugs together, you might expect that you get more toxicity, particularly on the bone marrow, which is the limiting dose for the drug. And we didn't see any additional cardiotoxicity. In fact, we saw a non-statistically significant trend towards less toxicity from the combination. Really excited. This is a really translatable model. So for a lot of mouse studies, you don't have a good idea that what works in a mouse will work in humans. Cancer is a notorious one for this, where people think, yeah, it works in mice, you can cure mice of cancer, and then you go to humans and the drug doesn't work. When it comes to cardiotoxicity, everything that causes cardiotoxicity in humans will cause cardiotoxicity in mice, and everything that rescues that will also in both models. So it's because it's a healthy organ. A mouse heart and a human heart are very similar. So you're not looking at a diseased organ or tissue. Other recent news, obviously the improved IV formulation. I think this is something that some of you will understand the importance of this, but I think it's maybe in general the market hasn't picked up on the significance of it. This is a really major breakthrough from not only from treating patients and the ease of treating patients, but also from an IP position. So the patents have basically reset. So where all the value of a drug comes from is in the last couple of years of the patent life, because it takes a long time to ramp up the usage of the drug. If you can add on 5 years or 10 years onto the patent life, that makes an enormous value to an acquirer of this drug. And ultimately this makes a big difference to the valuation of RACE. The other thing it does is it makes it much easier to use. The easier you can make a drug to use, the more that drug will get used. Clinicians are human. They like to do things, an easy thing versus a hard thing, and they will go for the easy thing. Also from a patient's perspective, like you'd really much rather get a needle in your arm than have a central line put in. So all of those things go together to make this a really major breakthrough, I think. Something we've been working on for a long time. Can't tell you how difficult this is to solve. Ledley tried to solve this, the original owners of it. They knew this problem. This is a hard problem to solve, and the people at RACE managed to solve it. Very proud of their work. Next slide. And then the final thing, which is a bit more blue sky, something that we took to you guys last year and said, if you guys give us the money, we'll do this. And that's to look beyond just cancer and beyond just Xantrine and look at this greater potential of this whole space. We've learned a lot about M6A. We know, well, at least we think we know why other people have really struggled to make drugs in this space. We think we've got an opportunity to go after this and develop drugs that target this pathway that can be used in other disease areas. For example, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, massive, just as big as cancer, massive problem, growing problem, along with obesity. But you can't use Xantrine for type 2 diabetes. You're not going to inject a drug into a patient every day like this. This can have a potential of something that's safe and easy that will work well and builds on the, for those of you who remember why I got banned from hot copper, the infamous French study that identified that actually bisantrene could overcome type 2 diabetes problems. So really exciting opportunity. Obviously it's high risk, but it's not very expensive, and it's a bonus there. If it works out, if our luck keeps flowing, why not? It could actually turn into something, and it turns us from being just a single drug company to a company that actually is really building a platform across this opportunity going forward. So, and I might actually turn this over to Phil. You probably heard enough from me for the moment.
Thanks, Daniel. This just tells you, if you're wondering what's coming up, the ticks tell you the two announcements we've made most recently. We'll give you an update on the IND, the US IND submission plan that's due. We've got additional animal data. We're doing everything we believe we should on cardioprotection to make sure we do it exactly right to the best of our ability. So we've got additional animal data. That's going to help us with understanding the dose, the right dose of bisantrene plus doxorubicin in this case, how to get that right. There's no easy answer. You've just got to do the work and try to determine exactly what it should be and then take it to patients. So we also are evaluating, determining what will be the cardioprotection trial plan. How will we do it? Where will we do it? What it will look like? What endpoints? That's under development. We'll share that when we can. So that's coming up. We believe we should have the first patient dosed in the Australian arm of the EMD AML trial, and updates on the European site. So quite a lot to happen, given that we're sitting here in October and there's only 10 weeks to go to the year end. So that's good news. Certainly, and there'll be more stuff in 23. There's not only two things there. There'll be a whole lot of stuff that'll happen, but the big ones will be, well, what are you going to do in solid tumors to learn about FTO? Daniel spoke about that. We'll have a view on that. We'll certainly communicate that. And we'll have results coming out of, additional results rather, coming out of the phase 2 combination drug Israeli trial. So quite a lot to happen. I mean, as soon as we know, we let you know. I mean, that's the deal. So continuous disclosure is what we have to do, but we have a preference for communication, and we do it as best we can, and we'll keep doing it that way, which is why we're here. So I think we're going to turn it over to Q&A. So Jane, how do we want to run the Q&A? We'll just open up.
So I think open up, and you've got 15 minutes.
16.
15.
15, okay. All right, so, okay, we've got a question.
Two questions. The first one is on the European trial. Is the first thing we're going to hear ethical approval, and would that be at the European level? That's my first question.
The answer is yes. The first thing you would hear is ethics, although you may hear governance approval before ethics, mainly because Europe just does everything strangely. Oh, I'm just saying it could be governance comes before ethics, just because the nature of the way they do things in Europe is very different to here in Australia. So, but ethics and governance are the two things you'd hear about first.
And my second question was about your idea that you had early on that bisantrene might be cardioprotective against itself.
Yeah.
Do we now know whether bisantrene is cardioprotective against itself? We know with doxorubicin, but
yep.
Is it also
Yeah, it is. If you put enough bisantrene, and we know from the cell work, if you put enough bisantrene into the cell, you can actually kill the cell you can cause cardiotoxicity. So you can overwhelm the protection effect. Protection effect's only got it up to a certain threshold. If you go above that, then you'll start to kill the cells. So, and that's exactly what you would expect if it's hitting by a rescue pathway. And so it probably is just as cardiotoxic as doxorubicin or any of the other anthracyclines. It's just that it self-rescues. And when you put it into the presence with doxorubicin, you rescue the damage that doxorubicin is causing as well. So, yeah, it's very interesting. I can't tell you how this happens. I don't know. We've got some hypotheses, which we're chasing up.
congratulations on thinking of it 3 years ago.
Before I even joined the company, but it certainly was something that intrigued me. As soon as I looked at the data, that's the thing about when I was doing due diligence, there's so many papers being published from the past, there's so much data out there that it took me hours and hours and hours. Like when I was going through doing due diligence on all the companies, I could get through some of them in like 30 minutes because there was basically nothing other than the press releases from the company to go from. When I got to race, I probably spent 50, 60 hours on it. So it was very exciting.
Are you struggling to recruit patients in any shape or form?
Everyone's struggling to recruit patients. It's very difficult to recruit any patients in any trial, but extramedullary AML is not exactly a common. As I went through, there's about 1,000 patients a year in Australia have AML. About 20% of those have EMD, and then 5% of patients will go into a clinical trial. It's a bit higher actually in AML, but you do the calculations on that, it's going to be a slow process. So you can expect that it will be a slow process. That's why we're going to Europe, where the numbers of people, it's a disease of old age. Italy and Spain are full of old people. Particularly the parts of Italy and Spain we're going to. Unfortunately, COVID took a lot of them out, but a lot survived, and a lot of them go on to get AML. So it's a great place to go and do these types of trials. They're also there really interested in EMD. It's been something that a lot of clinicians have known about. They know they need to do something about it. They know there's a problem, but no one's really come along with a solution. So unless you've got a drug you can actually test in it, it's sort of like, oh well, they've got EMD, what are you going to do? You just have to treat them as per normal. So we offer something. So, the European clinicians came to us. They saw the results from Professor Nagler published, and they said, this is something we're really excited about. And they contacted us and said, can we be involved in this? And we were, of course, really happy because getting clinicians interested in your trial is the key to success. If they're not interested, trust me, it doesn't matter how much you pay them, the trial's not going to be a success.
I've got a question on Pillar 3, but before I do, I just want to say thank you to you both and the team at RAC for the awesome job you guys are doing and the collaborators, and hopefully the cancer patients in the years ahead will thank you as well. But my question is, so the end game theoretically is a transaction of some sort. Do you see that will include Pillar 3, given that there's new molecules still to perhaps be discovered and will have a longer tail? Or is that an each way bet that maybe RAC will continue on at a form and sell off Xantrine or license it? Exactly.
Well, I think might be a better way of thinking about it is what Accent Therapeutics, which is our sort of, I would say, the lead second company in this space after us. They're all preclinical, they're very well funded. They did a huge deal with AstraZeneca that gave them mega bucks, $1.1 billion, a lot of cash up front. They took part of their program, which they had new drug development, and sold it off to another company called Service, I think they're called, $400 million. So they took this, they said this is not key to what we're doing, we're going to focus on. They developed these alternative drugs, someone else was interested in being in that space, and they sold that program to them. So this could be something in itself, could be the beginning of a program of collaboration just in itself, even at an early stage. One thing I maybe didn't mention is the class of drug, the class of protein that FTO belongs to is considered undruggable in the drug development community. It's very difficult to make a drug to that. And that's one of the reasons why, for those of you who've studied this in detail or read one of Mason's posts, we'll see that all those compounds that people have produced don't do a very good job of inhibiting FTO. And the reason why it's really difficult to actually make a drug that targets that protein. So for whatever reason, Xantrine works really well targeting it, but certainly no one deliberately developed an FTO inhibitor. Ledley didn't. They didn't know anything about FTO, but it just happens to work that way. So just chance, luck. So if we succeed, we may get a lot of interest at an early stage, preclinical. It doesn't have to go all the way through the clinic. So just another opportunity, relatively low cost. You guys thought it was a great idea. That's why you gave us the money to do it. So why not? Let's have a go.
Other questions? Yep.
Just briefly in relation to the IND, pardon me, does the FDA, do they have an obligatory time frame in which they have to
Yep.
respond to a submission? You can't sit in there in trade for eternity?
No, the FDA is, well, you could say inefficient, but very efficient. They've got, once you submit, they have to respond within 30 days. So, yeah.
And if they don't respond, it's a funny system. They don't ever approve your IND, they just don't reject it.
Yeah.
So if they say nothing for 30 days, then yeah, you're off. You can go off. It's like, that's the approval. So it's a, yeah, exactly. You don't want to hear from the FDA under those circumstances. You want to get to day 30 and we haven't heard anything from them. Yes, great, we're off. Yeah, the IND was a nice to have thing, and it's kind of a validation in one way as well. And it does give us opportunities, particularly partnership discussions. It's not essential for anything we're doing at the moment. We're not doing any trials in the US. We're not funded to do any trials in the US. So there's no need to, it's not going to hold anything up, but it would be something that would be great to get there, because it does give us that opportunity to leverage that. So if we had a conversation with a US-based company and they said, we would love to do a trial in collaboration with you in the US, we'd say, okay, that's easy, done.
Yeah. Readiness. Yeah. Okay.
A couple of weeks ago, there was a photo posted of Nick in the lab with a camera crew just out of shot. What was the camera crew there for?
Daniel was there.
Yes, I was there. I can't say at this stage. There's obviously, we're always interested in telling the story and getting that story out to a wider audience. It's an interesting story. Clinical trials are always, people are always interested in that. So I think there's something you can sort of just wait and something will happen. I can't tell you when. These sorts of things are not like earthquakes or natural disasters and so forth, where they have to come out at certain times. Other things are a bit more, it's a slow news day. This is something we might want to have a look at. So, but it's also beyond, there's a lot of interest for you guys as well. So I'm sure you guys have got many questions about what's going on with the trial. And this, I think, provides that.
All right, we've got 5 minutes question here.
Just to then follow on from what you said about general interest in what's going on. You've had the conference the last couple of days, and one of the things you've been doing, I guess you weren't sitting in the sun today in Melbourne, you're probably busy doing other stuff. How's that being received when you're going out and talking to new people and getting the story across to brokers or whoever it is?
Well, I'll say it's being received particularly well. We get personal feedback. I mean, you can get off a stage and people will tell you straight up, that was really interesting. You can kind of judge that somewhat immediately. And then there might be some of you who know someone who was there and suddenly you can read about it through the social threads. But then on the professional side, and there are a lot of professional investors there, a lot of them work in groups, and we were invited to pitch back and come to Gianni, who we met, who said, I've got 150 people who love biotech, come back to Melbourne, buy us lunch, and it'll be worth your while.
How many of those invites did you get so far?
Jane will be working on it, right? So, and we've been meeting some professional investors around town today. So, so we've had a good response. I mean, we haven't been, to be honest, we haven't been out on the road for a while.
It's interesting to find out how it's going. When you've got an audience here that has been following and understanding through different mediums for a while potentially. But when you're taking it to new people, they come to the booth afterwards, like you're finding that generally.
With any time when we get out and tell people, no one's going to invest in a company they haven't heard of or know nothing about. So you've got to get out there and get new people, tell them about the story. It's a great story. It's much easier to get out and talk about, doing something about cancer than, the other companies like resource companies, and they get up and say, we're going to dig a big hole in the ground. It's another one of the 100,000 holes in the ground here in Australia. So it's very hard to get people excited about that, but biotech and drug development and cancer is something that everyone knows somebody who's been touched by this. And, this is something, certainly for me, it's a good investment, but it's more than that. It's something that will, make a difference for a lot of people's lives. So that keeps me motivated. And keeps me working a lot more than what you guys pay me for. So,
all right, next question. We've got a couple of minutes, so anything else? Yeah, please.
The Pitt Street research, any viewpoint on the valuations they gave?
I'm going to tell you that our job is to make sure that it's not the numbers, but that the inputs and their understanding of strategy is factual, and we do that to the best of our ability. They run the models; it's their research. So I'm going to say it's interesting, and we're pleased to see it, and I think the market appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So we don't write those types of reports. So we have to. Unfortunately, in Australia, there is no very little. Well, there's really no free research. Like
you're going to get some valuations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we have.
Is that happened yet? Or?
Oh, I think you're referring to, if I may suggest, might be around cardiac protection. We're doing some research in the US to try to give you a better answer when you say, how much is that opportunity worth? So we're doing some work that will allow us to answer that question, if you ask it next year, more accurately.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before you develop a drug and spend all the money on it, you want to know there's a market for it. And ideally, you want to make sure that you ask the people who are going to buy the drug whether they're going to buy the drug before you make it, and not just what Phil thinks it's fantastic and I think it's fantastic, but we're not the customers. The customers are the oncologists.
Yeah.
And if they're not on board, it doesn't sell. And lots of drugs have fallen into that category where they, clinical success, they get approved, and then they don't sell, and doesn't help anyone when that happens. So we need to make sure that before we invest all of your money in a clinical program, that we get it right and we know that there's actually demand. So far, everything we've learned to date is suggested there is a market for a product like this.
We might take one. I can see two questions, so I'll go there first.
Okay. I know you said sufficient funds.
Yep.
But what would be your approach should an entity front up and say, I want to invest so much that wouldn't go well on market, but through a private placement, whatever means, to gain a percentage shareholder?
Sure. Well, they could buy a market, as you said. I mean, our approach to capital has been that we raise capital strategically against purpose and specific plans. We've been true to that to date. I think we'd remain true to that. So if a party, if it was a sophisticated party, perhaps a pharma party, i.e. partnership, and they had an agenda and they wanted to build out our clinical program and plans, that would be great to do. But if it's a financial entity, I don't know, would worry about that when and if it happens.
Yeah. All of this question always comes down to what is it in the interest of the shareholders. If it's not in the interest of the shareholders, we won't do it. If it is in the interest of the shareholders, we will do it.
Even if it's too good to refuse.
Well, I mean, we gave back what, $14 million. That was
we could have
put that in the bank.
Yeah.
We gave that back because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, a lot of people in the space asked us why we did that, because it's not standard. If if shareholders give you more money, you keep it, but it's not the way. And same with the buyback. We've been able to, I guess, optimise some of the programs we've got. We have a small amount of additional cash that we don't need, and we return that to the shareholders. It's the right thing. It's your money. You can spend it. We don't have to spend it for your.
I'm going to take a last question that was there.
Yeah, are you still in touch with Professor Chen in the background there and still getting his input for the clinical trials?
Yeah, he's still on the scientific advisory board. So a lot of those conversations you don't hear about because they're conversations between us, and they go into programs that will eventually get reported. So he's there to act as advisor and honour what we're up to. So we have Guy, for example, is also on the clinical advisory board. He's a very experienced drug developer and it's been really great input. And yet you guys have heard nothing about him other than the announcement that he's on the board.